Sometimes, in reality TV, it feels like shows are made by spinning a big wheel with a bunch of different types of people on it and seeing where it lands. In the case of the show for this week, it asks, would rich divorced women be interesting to watch? This is the recap episode, a weekly podcast about exploring and analyzing the stories told by reality TV season by season. I'm your host, Walker, social scientist and reality TV superfan. For this episode, I'm covering a decently unknown and hidden show. It's a one-season show, one of my favorite anomalies to appear, which already has so much to say about what we're getting into when a show can't get a second season made. This show is called Secrets and Wives, and it's a real Housewives-like following a friend group of middle-aged North Shore Long Island women who all know each other's pasts, dealing with divorce, life changes, romance, and whatever conflict they happen to be in that week. Before I get started, I'd just like to say, if you like what you hear in this episode, then consider giving the show a follow on your preferred podcasting platform. Rate and review the show, share it with a friend, and follow the pod on social media, on Instagram at The Recap Episode, or YouTube at The Recap Episode Pod. I'll say, if the show intrigues you from what you hear today, you can watch it on Amazon. I believe I bought it for $13. I'm sure if you tried really hard, you might be able to find it for cheaper elsewhere on the internet. Speaking of, the description of this show on Amazon reads, navigating the pitfalls of marriage and divorce, these 6 women, Andy Black, Susan Donison, Corey Goldfarb, Gail Greenberg, Amy Miller, and Liza Sandler, are all going through the process of reinventing themselves under the microscope of family, friends, and exes. So if you know your reality TV shows, you might be getting the vibe that this show is a bit of a Real Housewives-like. Bravo, of course, has perfected this formula as long as the show has the right cast. The Housewives format only works if the cast plays their roles in it appropriately. And we'll see if that happens as we go along. Now, I also want to say I'm going to end up making a lot of comparisons to another Bravo show that only got a single season, one that I covered recently for the podcast. That would be Princesses Long Island. That show and this show have a remarkable amount of similarities, to the point where it's a little suspicious. Both shows follow a cast of 6 women dealing with trouble in their romantic relationships and conflicts among their friend group. These 6 women are all from Long Island, and in particular 5 of the women in each show grew up in the North Shore, while one is from the South Shore, which is a big part of that woman's plot and her relationship to her friends. Both shows, very strangely, also aired on June 2nd of the year they premiered in. Princesses Long Island was June 2nd, 2013, and Secrets and Wives was June 2nd, 2015. And of course, both shows also only got one season. Neither were renewed for a second one, both were canceled. Now, just because the format is similar does not necessarily mean that they're exactly the same experience and show. The cast members themselves, of course, would want to set themselves apart from the Housewives extended universe. One of our 6 main ladies, Andy Black, said in an interview once about the show, I love the Housewives, but I think the main difference is we've all known each other for 20 to 30 years. When the cameras stop rolling, we're still talking about the same issue, referencing how the drama between the women in Secrets and Wives has history and they all keep going on about it, even off camera. These women really know each other, and they're not going to let the presence of a show crew change how they act and interact. I couldn't find a ton out about the history and the production of this show, but I was able to find one very interesting fact. So Secrets and Wives was produced by Haymaker Productions. And in an interview for Rap Book, a website all about the production of visual media, producer Irad Ayal revealed a little bit about how this show came to be in an interview he did for one of their podcasts. He said, we both had projects that were sort of on the cusp at different networks, talking about him and his partner who founded Haymaker Productions. And we were able to hold on to those projects and launched Haymaker with 2 series on Bravo. One of them was Southern Charm, which is still going on to this day. Another one was a show called Secrets and Wives, which initially was pitched as a Real Housewives of Long Island. Which I again bring this up just to make this connection and comparison to a Real Housewives show and that franchise. When you watch this show, it feels like you're watching something that wants to be Real Housewives, but doesn't quite stick the landing. So, what happened in this show, and what's it about? Secrets and Wives aired from June 2nd to July 21st, 2015 on Bravo, and aired 8 episodes in its one season. Before discussing the events and the women at the focus of the show, I do just want to take a moment to state that the pacing of this show was all over the place, both kind of to the benefit, but also to detriment. And this was not only picked up by me, but also a critic who had wrote an article for Yahoo about the show, noting that when you get attached to one of the scenes and you really get engrossed with it, suddenly you're moved on to another one. And so many things are crammed into one episode. It does have structure such that the main event of an episode is the focus, and we'll spend a lot of time with the one or two main big events, which usually has most of the women involved. There's going to be some conflict. Those parts are entertaining. But then for all this stuff in between, we'll have scenes that are maybe only like 45 seconds long. And it's really just like an update on one of the women. And it can keep things moving and engaging, but it can also make everything somewhat difficult to keep track of, just because so many different events or scenes happen in a single episode. And sometimes they are unrelated to each other, the two you might see one after the other. Other times they do these things where they kind of splice a side by side. Maybe it's two different women getting ready for the same event they're going to, and we're going to see one woman getting ready and talking to her husband and having their own conversation, and then this is stitched together with a different woman getting ready and having a conversation with her husband, and they go back and forth and back and forth. It can be helpful because they're talking about the same issue or the same thing, but it just kind of bombards you at times with just so many things going on. So who are the titular wives, or ex-wives in some cases? I'm going to read through some paraphrased descriptions from TV by the Numbers, an article they wrote back in 2015 to introduce the cast when the show was coming out, because I find them helpful for just kind of summarizing quickly what each woman is about and the experience and what we expect to see from them in the show. So first is Andy Black. She is a former backup singer for Jay and the Americans, and she married the lead singer of that group at the young age of 18, and since then has been married and divorced a total of 3 times. While her current boyfriend Adam closes on a house for the two of them, Andy moves in with her best friend Liza to get her last bit of girl time before both of them have their lives change. Andy is known to be the life of the party, and she's not afraid to bring up the taboo topics that are sometimes off limits for the group. Her life experiences have really opened her eyes to the hard truths of love, so she often finds herself attempting to fix others' relationships, even though this occasionally backfires. Through it all, Andy is incredibly loyal and willing to stick her neck out for the ladies in the group, as many of them are currently going through major life transitions, and she doesn't want them to make the same mistakes she has. Then there is Susan Donison. Susan married a wealthy bachelor at 30. But after having 2 children together, ended up divorcing him when she realized he wasn't the Prince Charming she always dreamed of. The man she truly fell in love with was her high school crush, Jonathan, but by the time they reconnected, he was on his way to prison to serve 2 years for securities fraud. Jonathan and Susan dated throughout his incarceration, and upon his release, Susan got pregnant with their now 5-year-old son, Ian. While some of Susan's friends look down on her and claim she doesn't fit in, she's the only lady in our group with a long-standing career, and she really prides herself on being a dedicated businesswoman who provides for her family. Susan's opinions are sometimes misconstrued, often taken the wrong way, and she ends up with her foot in her mouth because of this, but she generally pushes her friends to better themselves out of love and is truly looking for acceptance within the group and the Long Island social scene. Corey Goldfarb is friends with everyone in this tight-knit Long Island group. She's still married to her first husband, Sandy, and together they have 4 daughters, all embarking on young adulthood. After Sandy lost his job on Wall Street, he and Corey opened a high-end spa called Truth and Beauty, where Corey took on the role of co-owner. This business venture has put a significant strain on Sandy and Corey's marriage, as Sandy has invested a great deal in the company and also sold their Hamptons house to fund the project. Now, Corey struggles to work side by side with him. If balancing her family, the newfound business, and her social calendar weren't enough, Corey discovers suspicious texts on Sandy's phone that could threaten their relationship. So, now more than ever, she'll lean on her childhood friends for her support during these difficult times. Gail Greenberg is married to one of the top plastic surgeons in New York and is committed to keeping their love alive after having experienced one unsuccessful marriage. As such, most of her story focuses on her relationship with her husband, Dr. Greenberg, or Dr. G. Fearful of drifting apart in a relationship again, Gail is concerned that she doesn't fit into her workaholic husband's schedule and tries to find ways to incorporate herself into his world. She has a type A perfectionist personality when it comes to family, her appearance, fitness, and her fashion, and always strives to be the best version of herself. Gail's friendships mean everything to her, but despite their decade-long history, some might come to a head. In particular, she's often at odds with Susan and how she views her less sophisticated life choices. Amy Miller has never quite got it right with the men in her life. She split from her husband 5 years ago and is now with on-again, off-again fiancé Arthur. While her friends express strong disapproval of her current relationship, they can't help being protective and just want to see her happy. Amy never puts herself first and is always worrying about everyone else. While she loves having her 20-year-old son Max living at home with her, Amy constantly gets frustrated over his career indecisiveness and his immaturity, although she is certainly an enabler with him. Amy has high hopes for future self-discovery and lighthearted fun, but she fears her relationship may distract her from the enjoyable moments and instead put her at the center of the drama. And lastly, we have Liza Sandler. Just gonna say, Liza was my favorite. She gave some of the best TV of the show, and every scene with her was not only engaging, but I found myself always wanting to know what was going on with Liza. Even watching her just tour houses and apartments that she didn't end up liking was interesting and entertaining. Watch this show for Liza, and then secondarily watch it for Susan, then Corey. And you can also watch it for Gail and Amy and Andy, I guess. Liza married her high school sweetheart, who grew up to be a successful hedge fund manager in New York City. He was her first true love, but when they drifted apart, she had an affair with a high-powered media figure. This fling ended up in the tabloids, the newspapers, and the gossip columns, and this resulted in the end of their marriage. Now, Liza has reached a major turning point in her life. As part of the divorce settlement, she has to sell her home. So not only is she dealing with an empty nest, as her youngest daughter is just now moving out for college, but she also must figure out where she'll be living to begin the next chapter of her life. Struggling with these adjustments, Liza is heavily leaning on her gal pal Andy, close group of girlfriends, and two best friends, Pat and Glenn, who I call the party gays. They're party planners, and they're gay. With the details of her divorce creeping back into the limelight, Liza is trying to put the past behind her and focus on herself and her journey to find love once again. So that's our main cast. Of course, we'll also be paying attention to the husbands of those who are married, and sometimes the boyfriends of those who are in relationships. I didn't quite realize it when I was watching and put everything together, but going through all that, I realized that Liza is the only one who is, single during the run of the show. Gail is married, Corey is married, Susan is married, Andy's in a relationship, and Amy is in her on and off again thing with Arthur. Maybe that is why I enjoyed watching Liza the most, because she didn't have to deal with any relationship drama and problems, and she was just doing her own thing. I will say, the men in this show are so aggravating. The person who wrote the critics article on Yahoo that I read kind of hit on this and spoke about it in the same way that I think about it, and I like the language they used, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote here, but it's in the Secrets and Wives universe, is it worse to be single, or is it worse to be in a relationship? Because there's all this pressure put on oh, we've been divorced, we want to find true romance and happiness and everything, then how come all the men in this show suck? Well, you'll see what I mean when we get into what happens. So first, a brief-ish overview of all of the events that happen in this show, in this season. Episode 1, of course, is our introductory episode. We meet our main cast members. We get to know them a little bit. We're shown scenes of their life, such as, for example, Corey dealing with her daughters, or Susan having a little bit of an argument with her husband John about spending, the typical day-to-day things that go on. The main events of episode 1 include a rather cringy fashion show put on by Dr. G, Gail's husband, the plastic surgeon, where he shows off models but not wearing clothes, instead showing off the type of work that he's done for them, which most of the ladies agree is pretty strange. There's a pre-prom party for Liza's youngest daughter, Ryan, which is a big bash. Liza loves to throw big parties and big events. And at this party, Susan discusses with Andy about Liza's situation. In the whole episode, Liza's been kind of like freaking out a little bit about having to sell her home as part of the divorce settlement. And Susan just kind of like, what's the big deal? It's a great opportunity to like move on. The house is clearly part of Liza's past that she doesn't want to think about or be involved with anymore. What's the big problem? That's Susan's perspective. In episode 2, we begin to learn a little bit more about Corey and Sandy's business adventures with the spa that they went in on. And the big event of this episode is that the ladies go to the Hamptons, except for Amy. She's supposed to go to the Bahamas with Arthur, but then at the last minute, that trip got canceled. Which, this and an incident in the previous episode, which I'll talk about later, really set the stage for Arthur's bad behavior, and why you're quickly not going to be a fan of his when you watch this show. At group dinner and group hangouts in the Hamptons, there's confrontations between Susan and Liza, and Andy standing up for Liza, and Susan trying to be like, well, Andy was bad talking to you as well at the party, but Andy and Liza are besties, so they're defending each other, and Susan comes under fire for her comments about Liza from most of the group, as well as her marriage to John. Everyone just kind of starts attacking Susan, which is also a common thing that happens. In episode 3, we focus a lot on Susan, Andy, and Liza making up and trying to evolve their relationship, which is kind of a weird thing to like focus on when you think again about how the fact that these ladies have known each other for so long, that the show is trying to show us like, look, they're still like getting to know each other and all these things. And it's like, but haven't they known each other already for so long? I thought that was the whole point. It's still entertaining, but it's kind of weird to think about. The other two main parts of this episode is this is when Liza begins to start looking for houses and actually start making the moves to get out of her current house, which will be sold, and move into somewhere new and really start thinking about what is the next stage of her life. And Gail begins to assert herself at her husband's office, Dr. Greenberg, the plastic surgeon. She is worried that he will be unfaithful because both of them have had affairs in the past and problems with indiscretion, and additionally, harkening back to the model show from episode 1, Dr. G is surrounded by these younger women who have all had work done by him all day at work when she's completely separated from him. That begins Gail's kind of like arc for the show. In episode 4, some of our main plots include Amy getting her 20-year-old kind of lazy, lack of guidance and direction in life son Max back into a job with Jonathan, Susan's husband, who he used to work for, which goes interestingly and not in a great way for Jonathan. We do get some interesting exposition and time with Arthur, where he is being pleasant to Amy, and Corey has a little dinner party, during which John makes a huge asshole of himself, putting Susan in the line of fire for gossip again with her group of friends. Episode 5. At the end of episode 4, we actually stopped in the middle of the party after Jonathan made some comments and got a little too drunk and wild. Episode 5, we pick back up with that and kind of cap that off and deal with it. Most of episode 5, we focus on the whole crew going to Fire Island at the invite of Pat and Glenn, the party gays. While Amy was originally not expected to come, she does arrive, where the ladies stage a friend intervention of sorts to express their concerns over her relationship with Arthur. However, Amy's had enough. She stands her ground. At this point, she also had Liza and Andy talking to her about how they are seeing this relationship from the outside and are saying hey, this is not good, this is not healthy. Yeah, sure, he's good to you, but there's many times where he's horrible to you, and they don't want to see Amy stuck in that. While at Fire Island, there's another big group dinner that evolves into conflict and drama, where again, Susan gets ganged up on about her marriage to John and his behavior, and how she needs to deal with it. In episode 6, we come back to Gail for a little bit. She tries to make a lot more progress in asserting her placement in her husband's work life. Amy continues to grow even more upset with Max's immaturity. Corey pushes Sandy to attend couples therapy after she discovered texts on his phone from an ex. And Susan and John have a birthday party for their son Ian, at which John yet again upsets the group by making suggestive comments and getting physical with Liza. Episode 7, Corey and Liza confront Susan directly about John's behavior. Then, we spend a lot of time with Corey in this episode. Corey and Sandy attend their couples therapy, and all seems to go really well. And it looks like we're going to reach sort of a climax of that story. And I'll get into a little bit of that later. Gail discovers that the new surgery practice that her husband is building doesn't have an office for her, but it has plenty of room for 2 large operating rooms, which Stephen, her husband, simply states over and over again that he needs these giant these operating rooms, and maybe they can find a space for Gail at the office. Liza also goes to New York City to look at apartments to consider moving into the Big Apple. Sandy and Corey have a big 20-year anniversary party, at which Sandy greatly disappoints and lets Corey down by not giving a big declaration in front of everyone like she would have hoped he would do. Our last episode, episode 8, Max kind of quits his job with John halfway, but it's more like Max is like, I don't know if this job is me, and John is like, it's not, bye, see ya. Gail introduces new office uniforms to try to keep Dr. G on a leash while he's at work, and in return, well, not in return, but at the same time, Dr. G ends up surprising Gail with a brand new office at the new surgery practice location. It's hard to tell if this was a part of the plan the whole time and he simply surprised her with it, or if he did kind of walk some things back and realize he needed to do this to keep Gail actually happy. But she got her own little office, and it's cute. Sandy and Corey have another business meeting about the future of truth and beauty and where that's going to go, which leads to some anxiety about that business venture. And Liza has a big moving out and moving on party to celebrate leaving her old house, at which Arthur causes a scene and leaves Amy completely behind. But at the end of the episode, most of the group celebrates new beginnings and ends the season off by smashing a chandelier that was never installed in Liza's house due to her divorce, marking a big symbolic change and destruction of the harsh realities of the past and symbolic moving forward into the future. Now, this is a show all about these women, so let's get into talking about their experiences and what we kind of learn about them, North Shore, and I guess midlife relationships from watching this show, and any other remarkable things that happened. We'll start with Andy. We honestly get the least information about Andy throughout the show, and she has the smallest overall story. She's mostly around to provide advice to the other women, be a character in Liza and Amy's stories, and provide exposition along with reactions and commentary. For example, in episode 1, Andy is introduced first as Liza's best friend, then we see her meeting with Amy to talk about her relationship with Arthur, which is Amy's plot, not hers, and then chatting with Susan at Liza's party about Liza. What about Andy? Like, all we get is from the first episode is that she's temporarily living with Liza because her current boyfriend is looking for a house for them, and that her and Liza share a bed together for some reason. Andy's around for a lot of the conflict and the drama, but not typically at the center of it. When there's an argument between Susan and Liza, Andy is mostly just there to defend Liza, which happens multiple times, actually. I did see some description online that describes Andy as the ringleader of the group, and to the credit of that description, she does organize the Hamptons' intervention of Amy, and she's very able to get the other women along with her kind of plans or schemes or her ideas and what she thinks is right and advice that should be given to others. But overall, she really gets very minimal development herself. She is in this newer relationship and preparing to move in with her current boyfriend, Adam, but he's barely around in the show as well. Andy is also just kind of used for exposition, but this doesn't necessarily reveal anything about her. And that's it. She was a fun character. She is entertaining anytime she's on screen, and you can tell that she really cares about her friends, and she has a very interesting and unique perspective on their problems. But I didn't really learn anything specifically about Andy's current situation and thoughts on her own development and journey through life, which is fine. If we had all 6 of these women have really in-depth, complex stories, we would have needed more episodes or a whole second season. In contrast to how quickly we were able to move on from Andy, we have Susan, who seems to be caught up in something all the time and trying to constantly work to prove herself to her friends, much to the confusion of her husband, Jonathan. Susan is our career woman. She does some kind of sales work in fashion, but even though she talks about how much she's a working woman all the time, we literally only get one scene of her doing something related to her specific work, and then one other scene of her kind of giving some career and sales consultation advice to Corey for the spa. And during the scene focused on Susan kind of doing some fashion sales scouting at a different store, most of that scene is used for to just have her talk to her friends or business partners about the birthday party she plans in episode 5 and how much money she has to spend to feel like she can to fit in with the culture of the North Shore. It's not actually about her job and her career. It's setting up something else. Speaking of the North Shore, Susan, again, is also a cast member who was originally from the South Shore, which is seen as less classy and sophisticated. She reminds us of this constantly, and the other cast members also remind us of this. For example, Gail, who potentially just doesn't like Susan at all, tells us in a confessional at one point that Susan is often combative, and Corey outright says as well that she's just not classy, which is kind of the language that I stick with. Susan's story across the show focuses on 2 aspects: conflicts with the other ladies and trouble dealing with her husband's behavior. Susan's very first big moment in the show is talking with Andy about Liza's struggles facing the changes coming in her life at the end of episode 1. Susan just doesn't quite get why Liza is so caught up in selling the house, seeing it instead as a great opportunity to move forward. Additionally, Susan makes comments about how Liza doesn't have to work because she gets money from her divorce settlement. In the Hamptons, during episode 2, all this shit-talking comes back to bite her, as Andy, of course, shared Susan's critiques with Liza. They're gal pals, they're besties. Liza confronts Susan about her comments at the pre-prom party, and Susan says, "Hey, Andy was also saying you just want to find another guy who will take care of you." Andy denies this, and A+ editing, we get to see footage of Andy saying exactly that. This is how you make good reality TV. Andy starts to defend Liza, but Susan thinks that she should let Liza speak for herself. And then the other ladies jump in and bring up Susan's husband's criminal past. Apparently, when I describe it like this, it feels like they bring it up for no reason. But it's because they're kind of trying to point out to Susan, it's like, well, how are you on your high horse? You've got your husband who went to jail for 2 years for stealing money from people. And Susan's trying to be like, listen, he did a white-collar crime. That happens every day. And what John did in the grand scheme of things is not nearly as bad as what other people do. But the ladies all pile onto Susan with that, using it to attack her, and this ends with the dinner wrapping up with Susan obviously very upset. In episode 3, still in the Hamptons initially, Susan, Andy, and Liza talk and try to reconcile. Susan says that she really was most upset about all the ladies talking about Jonathan and all of his past criminal activity. After addressing this, she moves on to her opinions on Liza again. Susan, she feels like every woman can be as strong as her due to what she went to, and every woman should be as strong as her. And she really just thinks Liza's divorce wasn't nearly that bad. Keep in mind, again, Liza's divorce happened because she had an affair that was then put in the newspaper. So, I don't know, apples to oranges or something like that. All of this, however, leads into Susan, again, bringing up how Liza doesn't work while Susan is a working woman, a working gal, and Liza isn't having it. Liza says, "I'm not lazy. Nobody knows what goes on in my life. Goodbye." That's a direct quote, by the way. And Susan, at this point, mid, confrontation, she's legit like, I just don't get it. I don't get why Liza is so upset and distraught. She says, I really made a big mistake. I should have considered Liza's feelings about going through a divorce. Which is such a wild thing for her to have a sudden realization. Again, I come back to this thing, it's like these women have known each other for so long. How are we just now, according to the internal timeline and chronology of the show and what's shown to us, just the text and a little bit of the subtext, how are we just now getting these conversations and these realizations happening after so many years? These women are in their 40s and 50s. What is happening? All this altercation ends with Liza saying that Susan and I are going to agree to disagree, and that's why we're friends. And this is what I meant earlier about the Housewives format only really happens well if everyone plays their role correctly. To have an entertaining season of Housewives, you need to have conflicts that carry over and eventually come up to such a boiling point that it turns into an explosion. That's what people like to watch. They like to see the "don't talk about my husband." They like to see the fake leg thrown over the table. Right? So when these ladies are just you know what? We've been friends for so long. Let's just agree to disagree and move on and move past it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that well. Luckily, plenty of other things do happen that kind of keep things moving forward, but it feels like you're missing something, and it feels like things end too early. The end of episode 3, post return from the Hamptons, has another chat with Andy, Susan, and Liza. Andy and Liza invite Susan out for dinner, and this is basically just an opportunity for them to kind of sit down, reset a little bit, and just have a normal dinner and just talk and not really confront each other over anything. It ends up going pretty well. They gossip about almost everyone during this. And the dinner ends with Andy and Liza both saying to Susan's face, they're like, listen, we like this Susan a lot more than the previous Susan we were just getting. Which is a wild thing to say to someone's face, but I also do kind of get it. You want to point out to your friend, listen, you're being kind of an asshole. Fix it, please. In episode 4, Susan's plot was largely tied up in the behavior of her husband. And this is when this really starts as her main thing she's involved with, which kind of sucks again for the show. It's the show is about these women, but then this plot is about Susan having to deal with the behavior and the antics of her husband and how it's impacting her image and her relationships with her friends. It's weird. It's a weird thing to focus on and end up inadvertently making the story about that. Early on in episode 4, Susan pleads with John to let Max, Amy's son, have his job back at John's solar panel business. He very reluctantly agrees after Amy comes by to help make the case and convince him that John would be a really good fatherly influence on Max. Because, and I'll get into this when we talk about Amy, Amy's ex, Max's dad, he's kind of useless. He's got a lot of practical skills. We're told he's a builder, but he kind of has the same lack of responsibility that Max has. You can kind of tell it's rubbed off onto him, and then Amy's enabling nature just didn't really help that at all. Regardless, that's Amy. We're on Susan. At the end of episode 4, again, Corey holds a dinner party, and Susan and John go. During this party, John has a bit too much to drink and starts to get on everyone's nerves. Specifically, he's just bored out of his mind with the inane, baseless conversations that these women are having that he just can't get along with. He's like, oh my god, please, can we talk about anything else? And when they try to be like, well, John, what do you want to talk about? He's like, yeah, shut up. I don't want to hear it. And that kind of like, everyone's like shocked and surprised. And Susan's like, what? Where is this behavior coming from? You know, because she knows when it's happening that she's like, great. I just started to piece together these relationships back together again after the conflicts recently. And now John's ruining this for me. In the following episode, Susan is dealing with the aftermath of John's blow up at Corey's party. When the whole gang goes to Fire Island, she's initially very nervous about being around all of them because of this, especially Gail, who has always been the most disapproving of Susan, even if not vocally. At Fire Island, however, Susan manages to avoid the focus of the attention at first because we're all talking about Amy and her relationship. However, at another dinner, the talk turns once again to Susan and John, to the point where Susan fully leaves, like upset, and Amy has to go check on her and see what's going on. Things seem to be okay. Susan calms down and realizes that this is just an endless cycle that she's going to have to deal with the next morning, still in Fire Island, and she starts to, move forward. Episode 6, this is when Susan throws a birthday party for her son Ian. As part of the planning and prep, she has a chat with John about being on his best behavior and not upsetting her friends. John still really doesn't quite get why these ladies are her friends at all, when they often think so little of both her and her marriage, but Susan persists. This was the episode where we also again got the one single major scene about Susan doing some work relating to her business, and she only mentions it for like 20 or 30 seconds, and they're really just there for her to talk about how much money she's spending on this party. Again, such a strange choice to make this the career woman and then not focus on any of her career stuff at all. And as you may expect, and as I mentioned earlier, John still somehow ends up causing problems. When all the gang goes into a bounce house, John ends up shoving his thumb up Liza's ass and then pushes her when she confronts him about it. So now Susan's got to deal with that. And honestly, the rest of Susan's time on the show is wrapped up dealing with John and his antics. In episode 7, the two of them meet in the middle of the day to talk about him actually making an effort to be better with her friends, which he does follow up on in the final episode at Liza's big party, and also that same episode at Corey and Sandy's 20th anniversary party. In all, Susan, despite being a self-described career woman, had her plot entirely wrapped up in her marriage. But not due to the problems in her marriage. Their marriage is actually extremely stable. Susan and John love each other very much. You can tell they have an incredible relationship. And Susan wants to support John, even though her friends don't like him for a lot of the season. So the problems aren't there. Rather, they're just because of how the other women respond to her husband. He's got kind of a big personality, but the kind that they don't like. So, before I move on, I just want to say another comparison to that other show, Princesses Long Island. That show also had a cast member character who was specifically from the South Shore, and that was made as part of how the other ladies saw her and treated her. Particularly one really, really didn't like her, that was used to being treated like a princess, for lack of better language, and did not like how this character, Joey, from the South Shore, was constantly doing things that were seen as less classy and less sophisticated, less wealthy, less affluent. Another very interesting comparison is that not only are both of these women from the South Shore, in Princesses Long Island, Joey is also the one we really focus on as being the working girl. Not only is she working like a part-time job or something like that, or multiple part-time jobs, she's trying to start her own business that she's been working on. One of the other characters in that show, Amanda, is also trying to start her own business, but that's just kind of like her fun little side project. She doesn't really like need to do it. But Joey is like fully trying to do it and has these kind of stakes put on her because she's living with her dad And her dad gives her an ultimatum that's like, hey, listen, if this business you're trying to start doesn't get off the ground in so many days, you're out of my house. He wants her out. Like, he's tired of helping her like that. It's very interesting to me that both of these shows took the woman that is from the South Shore and then also made her characterized specifically as the working girl. And we also didn't really get to see a lot of actual working going on. We definitely got more with Joey and Princesses than we did with Susan here in Secrets and Wives, but a lot of Joey's stuff was tied up in conflicts with the other women of the group, specifically one, Ashley. Just found that interesting as a funny point of like comparison, and I can't even say contrast, because they made these two women characterized so similarly, and it's hard to figure out why. Like, it feels that the conclusion I'm supposed to make here, looking at both of their cases, is that working women are from the South Shore, and those are the ones who have to support their family by working. In comparison, the women from the North Shore get to skate on by and rely on the wealth and their luxury. That feels kind of weird, just saying. But let's move on to talking about Corey. As I mentioned before, much of Corey's story focuses on her troubles with her husband, Sandy. Corey is actually the first cast member we're introduced to in episode 1. We observe her struggle with her dog, her maid, her daughters, and her husband. Because Corey was the first cast member introduced to us here, she also pulls a lot of weight expositing early on about a lot of the other ladies in that episode. As a result, we don't get a lot of deep moments with her just quite yet. But in episode 2, we get to go with her and Sandy to see how they run this spa business venture that they have gone in on together, Truth and Beauty. In this episode, we get to watch a meeting between Sandy, Corey, and their office manager at Truth and Beauty, Alexis. During this meeting, we get to see just how overbearing Sandy can be when it comes to running the spa and making decisions. When Alexis tries to argue that he's stepping in too much, he complains about the concerns over the invested money, concerns that Corey shares as well, while also feeling the nuisance of Sandy's presence and behaviors. Sandy's behavior in this regard continues into the 3rd episode, in which we get to see another meeting of the two of them with Alexis, and it's to the point where Alexis attempts to talk with Corey about getting Sandy to let her do her job and have him only deal with the investors. However, Corey isn't super helpful in this regard, as when she could step in to maybe say something to Sandy to support Alexis, she instead starts asking questions about customer base and sales. But to be fair, she's worried about their future, not just the company, but also their family, which she shares with us in a confessional. However, this does show a little bit of the relationship dynamic between Corey and Sandy, and how she really does kind of like, as much as she is annoyed by his behavior, she doesn't put up a lot of an offense against it, and kind of lets a lot of things skate on by and get through. Later on, in a couple episodes past that one, when Corey has her dinner party at her place, and Liza's there. They also use the dinner party, as I'll mention later, to kind of do a blind date for Liza. Again, she's the only currently single one out of the whole group. Susan and John are in attendance as well. As I mentioned when I covered Susan, this is when John really makes an ass of himself, and just in front of everyone, but also ultimately ends up really upsetting Corey specifically. And I wanted to bring this up, even though it's maybe not directly connected to her Sandy drama, but it is, because the entire time, Sandy was just completely unhelpful and not doing anything to try to get Jonathan to behave, tone him down, try to get him to apologize to his wife. John does eventually apologize to Corey, like, that same night. It's one of those weird half apologies where he's like, come on, don't be mad, don't be upset, so it doesn't really count. But, you know, Corey tried to rely on Sandy here, and he just, like, didn't do anything helpful, which is a theme that's going to continue. After the ladies all go to Fire Island, and when they return, is when we open up to the next part of Sandy and Corey's story in this show. Sometime in the past, it's actually kind of unclear when this happened. Every now and then we get some footage and also allusions to events that occurred like right before episode 1. Kind of interesting to show that they were filming and then chose a very specific point to kind of start the story, even though they have existing footage and use it sometimes before we get to come into the story. And sometime in the recent past, Corey had discovered text messages from one of Sandy's exes on his phone. Now, Sandy didn't reply, but these messages were, in Corey's words, provocative, and trying to get Sandy to come meet up with her and, set up an affair, essentially. And this puts Corey it shakes her because Sandy didn't tell her about it. She found it out later, and now she doesn't know if she can properly trust Sandy or what's going on. And is this also coming about because of the stress that they are facing due to the issues with the spa business? So Corey and Sandy talk about it, and Corey suggests they go to see a therapist together. A little bit later, Corey and Gail get a moment to kind of meet up during a little fun, friendly tennis match with the two couples, Corey and Sandy and Gail and Dr. Greenberg. And Corey and Gail step aside to kind of talk about it. During this time, Corey picks up that Sandy's behavior is definitely changing for the first time ever that we've seen, and he's actually putting in a little bit of a different kind of effort than he normally does. He's very just kind of there. He feels like a bump on a log half the time when you're watching him. Someone will say something to him and he just kind of looks at them or makes just a very sort of small quip or remark. But Corey is picking up that he's stepping up a little bit, perhaps because he knows that she's very upset with him because of the text messages. During the episode where they have their big anniversary party, this is when they go to the couple's therapy. And the therapy session ends up being really helpful for them. Corey explains to that therapist that she wants to work on their communication leading into their 20-year anniversary. Corey explains the text from the ex, and the therapist asks, well, what evidence do you have to not trust Sandy? And she says, well, Sandy is a bit of a flirt. And then both of them is a very quick little comments, but to kind of Sandy to defend himself, and Corey agrees. He's like, listen, everyone in their neighborhood is a flirt. If you're good looking, you're going to get comments. That's how it works around here. That's how all these affairs keep happening. The therapist does point out, for Corey's benefit and for ours, to kind of validate what we've been seeing, that Sandy tends to put Corey down pretty regularly. When she has complaints, when she has requests, he pushes them aside. And it's something he needs to work on. However, there is a little bit of a breakthrough here. Sandy does find the words somehow to explain to Corey and explain to the therapist that from his perspective, 20 years ago, he was sure that he would never get married, that he would never do this. And then he met Corey, and that idea and attitude completely changed. So there is a very deep relationship here. It's just not being shown very well. So Corey loved that sort of like outpouring of emotion, and her and the therapist are kind of agreeing. So like, hey, Sandy, maybe at this big anniversary party that y'all are planning to throw, maybe you do a similar declaration and make a grand gesture, and that would make Corey feel a lot better in their relationship. And so it looks like things are going to go well. It looks like this is a nice little like heading to a climax of Corey and Sandy's story. Things are going to happen. There's going to be this big event. We get to the anniversary party. Sandy's getting wasted. Schwasted, even. And he's just kind of moseying around, doing his own thing, embarrassing himself and Corey a little bit. Corey gets up during the party to make a speech, thanking everyone to come and talking about her marriage with Sandy to try to lead him into doing this big declaration speech that they discussed. And Sandy just doesn't do it. Corey tries to wrap up her speech, and she starts like demanding that Sandy come up there and like say something to her, which is a little embarrassing for everyone involved. And people are like pulling out their phone to start recording, which is kind of just like sad. I'm just gonna say. And at the very end, Sandy runs up there, and he's just like a very quick little comments. Oh, I love you. Happy anniversary. Let's party. So Corey is obviously upset, but she does hide this pretty well. And later on, for the rest of the season, Corey is still obviously very upset about this, and they do eventually talk it out. They managed to work it out. I'm kind of annoyed that they did. The only other thing that really happens with Corey after this is another final meeting and kind of discussion about what the future of the spa will be. And it's very unclear. That meeting does not really lead into anything. It kind of just leads into Sandy and Corey being nervous about the amount of money they're making and their customer base and the amount of people they're bringing back in. And Sandy kind of leaves that meeting with an ultimatum. He's like, listen, in 8 months, if we're at the same levels of business, we're moving back to the boroughs. So Corey was a fun cast member. She provides a lot of levity and also insight to a lot of the relationships and the interactions and the activities that go on. But her story here is just so frustrating. Sandy is so annoying to watch, and the entire story can be described very succinctly as the whole season Sandy just lets Corey down. He could have defended her, he could have spoken up and put John in his place during the party. He didn't do shit. He could have stepped up and really tried to build up her confidence and reassure her about this silly thing with the ex. Doesn't do anything there. At one point while they're talking about this, they're in his office at the house, and he just calls up Liza to confirm that she's coming over for that party, or some other event. And Corey's sitting there how and why do you have Liza's number on your phone? The office phone. She's like, what is going on? And then at the anniversary party, the ultimate letdown there. And so it's, as much as I enjoyed watching Corey's moments, it was just kind of sad. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Move on to the next one. Gail conveniently doesn't have much to talk about. Kind of like Andy, she is more than Andy, but it's very much the same thing the whole time. Gail's entire storyline is focused on her relationship with her husband, Dr. G, the plastic surgeon, and how she's trying to assert herself into his life more. Because both of them have apparently had some previous affairs, and she wants to make sure that doesn't happen. She wants to strengthen a relationship. So she's doing all sorts of things, like showing up to the surgery practice constantly, just being around, which you can tell the staff that work at the practice, the receptionist staff, don't like Gail. They like being able to joke around and half flirt with the handsome plastic surgeon that did the work done on them. And of course, Dr. G loves this as well. And then when Gail's around, they can't, because the wife is here, right? She's trying to put herself into his work life a bit more, in part because he is so committed to his work. Part of her frustration is that Dr. G is so into this practice, especially since it's going to be evolving soon and moving to a newer, larger location, that he doesn't spend a lot of time with her or doing other things outside of work. So from her perspective, she's like, well, if he's not coming to me, I'll come to him. So she's going to the office all the time. She's trying to sort of supplant herself in helping to run the practice. Early on, we see that one of the things she's pitching and she starts to organize is a new uniform for the staff that work at the practice. They kind of could just sort of dress however they want, including being revealing, which she does not want around her husband. And so she proposes everyone get these nice blazers. By the end of the season, this does come full circle, and they do get the blazers and make the ladies wear them, although they are resistant to this the whole time. Although they do manage to sell it, and Dr. G agrees. It's kind of listen, we're evolving. We need to be a little more professional and look a bit more put together and cohesive. But Gail is also coming around trying to get Dr. G to join in her on her fitness and workout plans, trying to eat healthy the same way she does, trying to do the same activities she does. When the group goes to the Hamptons, it was originally really just supposed to be kind of a girls' trip. Sandy comes with Corey, but Sandy's off at the bar the whole time. He's not really hanging out with Corey when it's the big girls' activities. But Gail makes Dr. G come hang out for the girls' activities. So that's where we're kind of at with that. And then, of course, there is a little bit of, while she's trying to assert herself, at the current practice, there is no place for her. So there's this big symbolic transition of, will Gail have a physical office space at the new plastic surgery practice location? And for a while, it seemed like, no, there's not going to be, to the point where Steven potentially even just like forgot about it. That's what, like, how it's kind of edited and produced. You're like, wow, this guy's an asshole. But he does surprise her with the office in the 8th episode. So that's kind of a little confusing, but it does wrap it up. It is a nice moment because she's really happy about it. Although then it's very, very, like, funnily punctuated with the fact that she is like, oh, I can do my work. And she's like, well, I won't actually be doing work. I'll mostly just be like, managing calendars, scheduling dinners, stuff like that. So like, she's not really like doing anything to help with the surgery practice. She's just kind of like doing the housewife thing, but at the clinic, essentially. Something I hadn't mentioned yet is that Gail and Susan don't really have a strong and solid relationship. I mentioned this when I talked about Susan. Gail doesn't really like Susan's background. Susan understands. She kind of gets the like, listen, I know that people aren't going to like me. But it's very interesting at one point, and I wanted to bring this up because I had just mentioned how Gail's like, quote, working at the surgery practice, but not actually doing anything for the actual practice itself. Susan discusses at some point along the season the different ways that the women in the North Shore, quote, work. She explains that the North Shore working woman either has a store her husband bought her, Corey, helps out with her husband's business, Gail, or sits at home and doesn't work, Liza. Which, is such an interesting angle for Susan to like take and tell us about the kind of like culture of the North Shore. There's these little tidbits sprinkled throughout that I kind of love, that I'm like, oh, that's what this world is like. One of the coolest things about reality TV is that it can expose a very particular niche community or group of people to a much wider audience. And you can kind of learn about the cultures and the customs and the behaviors and the traditions of that community and its people. And that's why I do this podcast, because that fascinates me. It's not always easily done, but in a show like this, where it's like, this is a very specific, it's this little gaggle gang crew of 40s, 50s women who live in Long Island and have all had drama in the romantic department of their lives. It's like, oh, what am I going to learn about these women and about Long Island and about the women who live, or the people who live in the North Shore and this kind of like wealthier, affluent community. And this is one of the things. But all in all, that's Gail. She had more of a story than Andy, but again, it was all centered on her relationship to her current husband. Next, we have possibly the most unfortunate cast member of the show, Amy Miller. Her entire story is not only wrapped up in dealing with one man, but technically 3. Amy is currently in a relationship with her on-again, off-again fiancé, Arthur, who is very volatile and is a bit of a wild card and a bit of an uncomfortable character throughout the entire show, not only to the audience watching, but also to all of Amy's friends. There's a lot of tense moments and a lot of confrontation where these women are trying to convince Amy to leave this man, leave this relationship, and get out of it, because it's clearly not good for her. We don't see a lot of Arthur because he tends to bail on things. The very first impression we get of him, though, is in episode 1, Amy and Andy have met up for like lunch or a coffee or something and are chatting about the relationship. And Amy's, complaining a little bit about like, sometimes it's really good, but sometimes it's really bad. And Andy, the advice giver, of course, is just like, girl, leave him. Girl, dump him. Block him. Which, Amy, same. That's the same advice I give my friends. And then all of a sudden, and this is one of the best line deliveries ever, and I want to incorporate this into my own, like, lexicon. Arthur just appears, and he comes up to them suddenly, and as he approaches, Andy kind of recognizes him, and she goes, oh, we have a guest speaker. Andy, Wonderful. That was such a good line. And Arthur comes up and he's like, "We're not doing this. This is stupid." And he like storms off. To the point where I think what happened next is that a producer or like one of the camera crew kind of cut in and was like, "Who was that?" And Andy had to explain to him, like sort of shout over, like, "That was Arthur." And Amy's just kind of sitting there like stunned because what the hell was that? And literally that's our first impression, and it kind of just makes him seem crazy, for lack of a better word. The rest of the show, when it comes to Arthur, we're told all of the things he's kind of like doing to Amy and how bad he's being to her. Like they were going to go to the Bahamas, and then nope, the trip suddenly canceled. And then they're meeting one time because he works as like a dentist, and Amy goes there and we're seeing them talk, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to get you a new engagement ring because the previous one I gave you had bad energy, bad karma, all these things." And so it seems like he could be nice. And then the next thing we learn that he's being bad to her again. They show up to some event and Amy looks upset and everyone's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Well, Arthur and I just had a really big fight." And so it's this on again, off again, on again, off again kind of thing. It all kind of like, and when the girls go to Fire Island, they stage an intervention for Amy where they're kind of like, "Listen, all of us think you need to get out of this relationship. This is not good. We've been watching you this whole time and trying to support you, but it's getting more difficult and it's getting rougher, and we don't think this is good for you." Amy stands her ground here in a very hilarious moment, unintentionally hilarious. She's just good at the clapback in this moment. And she's like, "I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I appreciate you looking out for me, but I'm an adult and I can make these decisions and I can figure it out on my own." And this continues to go poorly for her. And Andy has her back the whole time, and she continues to kind of push this throughout the whole season, which props to Andy for being strong here and not backing down just because her friend wants her to, and kind of sticking with her gut and what she believes in. Shout out to Andy for that. All of this really comes to a head in the final episode when they head to Liza's going away party. Arthur comes. Everyone's like, "Oh, is he going to be good?" He had also came in the previous episode to Corey and Sandy's 20th anniversary party, and he was great the entire time. He talked to people. He had a good time. Nothing happened. There were no blow-ups or anything. But then at Liza's party, it's hard to tell what happens, but he arrives and then immediately like wanders off to go like be alone. And Amy can't find him. She's wandering all over the house looking for him at one point. Finally spots him like in the backyard. And when she goes to talk to him, he's like, "Oh, I'm on the phone with someone." And Amy comes back in and everyone's like, "What's going on? What's going on with Arthur?" And then he comes back and he's just like, "Okay, I'm gone. I'm done. I'm leaving. Max will take you home." Max, her son. And it just like ends there for this entire plot line. And it's such a wild, like, what? What happened? Arthur, again, the men in this show will just disappoint you. The only good ones are the party gays. Speaking of Max, that's Amy's 20-year-old son who has a lot of career indecisiveness and is very immature and is also very, like, for as much as he finds a way to kind of weasel his way out of taking the blame and being held responsible for things, he's also very intense. And he knows how to like manipulate his mom to kind of get what he wants. And then it's also not helped by her enabling. What I mean by that is at one point he kind of gets in trouble with her for a speeding ticket, and then later on he gets in trouble with her because while they were at the Fire Island, he broke Amy's like kitchen table having like a party or something, and she tries to get him to own up to this and be responsible for both these things. And what he does both times is he just brings up Arthur. Like she's trying to confront him about growing up finally and figuring out what he wants to do and learning how to take responsibility, and he's just like, "Oh, well, how's your relationship going? How are things with Arthur?" Because Max doesn't like Arthur. He recognizes that Arthur's not good for her, and he's using this like as a weapon to not have to confront his own shortcomings. Which is just like, damn. Amy has it rough. I'll just mention it here because it is brought up multiple times and in multiple episodes, and it intersects with Susan and Jonathan's story. Max used to work for Jonathan, and then he lost the job because he's not good at it. And part of the way through this show, this like timeline of events that are shown to us, Amy goes to ask Susan to ask Jonathan to give the job position back to Max so he can hopefully get some work experience and get some guidance and get some direction in his life. Because he's 20 and he's just sort of living at home, and Amy is growing increasingly tired of all of his shenanigans and bullshit. And well, she wants him out. She wants him to move on. She wants him to grow up. And so John does give him the job. He's not very good at it. He keeps making all these like silly faux pas. Like Jonathan gave him like a company t-shirt to wear while he's doing the job. And Max is like, oh, it didn't fit quite right. Or I didn't like it how it was, so I cut off the sleeves. It's just like, what? Huh? Okay. By the end of the season, Max sort of ends up in a discussion with John and one of the other guys who works for the company. He's like, yeah, I don't know if this like work is just like not a good fit for me. I don't know if I'm meant to do this. And John is like, oh, okay, so you're telling me I should get rid of you because clearly you're not good at it. And Max is like, huh? Like not realizing that he just kind of like signed his own pink slip there. The only other real like man in Amy's life is her ex-husband Mark. He comes around every now and then, and Amy's very dismissive of him. She doesn't want anything to do with him. Honestly, I like that. Points for Amy there. The last wife and the last secrets is Liza. Ironically, not currently married. The only single one in the group. She's my favorite. Her story, I think, is the best and is the most entertaining and engaging to watch. Perhaps because she's single and she's not particularly looking for a relationship over the course of the show. She's more focused on the fact that now all of her kids are moving out. The first episode has a prom party for her youngest daughter, Ryan. And by the 7th episode, Eliza actually misses Corey and Sandy's 20th anniversary party because she's dropping Ryan off at college. Which I was very grateful for those 2 time points, because I love to try to figure out the chronology of filming for these shows if I can't figure out the information. That was so helpful because that basically told me the show was filmed over the whole summer. So, thank you, Liza's story. And that's a big like transition for her. She's going to be, quote, an empty nester now, although she really doesn't like to think of it that way. And then alongside this, she's having to move out of her house as part of the divorce settlement, so she has to find a new place to live. Andy's been living with her for a while Andy's current boyfriend, Adam, finds a house for them, and that's getting wrapped up by the end of the show, so Andy's going to be moving out. So Liza's facing a lot of different transitions and things changing in her life, and fortunately, none of them have to do with a relationship with a man. And it's so nice, and it makes her story so refreshing to watch. Her best friends are the party gays, along with the other women. So, and they're just delightful TV as well, the party gays are. There's one really good scene where they come over for some like little event or something, and one of the party gays, Pat and Glenn, brings in like a fruit tart, and he's like, I brought you a fruit tart. Haha, that's me. And I don't think I laughed so much yet in the show up to that point, except for when Andy said the like, oh, we have a guest speaker. And I think the only other time was later on, Amy's talking about how nice Arthur is. And I think it was Susan or someone who says like, listen, he's nice. So was the son of Sam, David Berkowitz. Every now and then, the ladies had a really good quip. The show would be really good for those like quotable, memeable screen caps. But just no one's ever heard of it. This is a void I need to fill, clearly. But Liza's just the best to watch. And, she does have some conflict with some of the other ladies. Particularly in the beginning, she clashes with Susan. But then they make up and they move on. And then she does have quite a bit of strife with Jonathan towards the end because of him being gross and physical towards her, which is a very interesting piece of the element of the like these people have known each other for a very long time. Liza and Jonathan have apparently known each other since they were like 13, 14. So that provides like a very interesting layer to specifically the relationship between those two people. and how it evolved over the years and how we get to watch it. But, you know, Liza's good. She's chill. The biggest thing for her is we finally build up to this big grand party that she holds to sort of celebrate her moving on to a different stage of her life, selling the house, moving out, and of course it's symbolically ending with smashing this big chandelier, which we're told when the house got purchased and her ex-husband moved in, the chandelier was one of the last things to be put up, and it was never actually installed because then the divorce happened. So this whole time, all the years she's been living in this house as she got from the settlement initially but now has to move out of, the chandelier was just sitting in the garage, and it was there waiting, you know, pretty much like a telltale heart symbol of a reminder of that bad relationship. And so then at the end, they get to break it. They get to crash it. They get to kind of like out with the old, in with the new kind of thing. And even though she's leaving everything in a state of flux, she doesn't know where she's going to go yet, but she'll figure it out, right? She's comforted by being able to move on, even though at the beginning of the series she was initially challenged by it. Dare I say she had the most growth out of all the women on this show, and she's the best character for that. Speaking of leaving things off, and we're just kind of like, well, what's going to happen next? A lot of plot lines were left unfinished at the end of the show, to the point where you could have a second season that explores these. I couldn't figure out why the show was canceled, why it was not renewed. I just couldn't find anywhere online that was talking about that. But like, everyone had something that could have been continued or expanded upon with a further season or a couple more episodes. For example, Amy and Arthur. What now with them? Arthur abandoned her at the party. Is she going to stay with him? She was making remarks that this is the final last straw, actually. Finally. But do we believe that? She said that before. Corey and Sandy, their relationship is still growing and going strong, but what about Truth and Beauty? What will happen with the spa business? With Liza, of course, you know, where is she going? What will she do next? Will she move to the Big Apple? Will she try to find a different house? Will she end up in a future relationship? Partway through the season, they tried to sort of set up like a blind date with her, and it went okay, but it was overshadowed by Jonathan being an asshole at Corey's party. With Gail, you know, how will being around the practice more often change her and Dr. G's relationship? Is she going to become too assertive to the point where it puts a strain on that, and neither of them end up liking that arrangement? Andy, again, we got the least development out of her. She's going to be moving in with Adam, so how will that go? And also now she'll be busy with that and separated from the other ladies more often, potentially. So how is her relationship to everyone going to change? And then if Susan, finally, the outstanding question is, will Jonathan ever be enough for her girl group? You know? And I think these all would be like very interesting storylines to like follow up with in a second season that we just never got. If you can't tell, I did enjoy watching this show. I like this one a lot. I will say, when I first like put the first episode on and I watched it, I kind of sat there afterwards like, well, that was an experience. I don't quite know what to make of that. Part of that was just the pacing, though, because they throw so many different scenes and events at you in one episode. You're kind of like, what did I just experience? What did I even watch? What happened here? But by the time I got, honestly, halfway through the show and the season, I was hooked. I was engaged. I did enjoy watching it. I'd put it at like a 4 out of 10. So that was Secrets and Wives, another one-season Bravo show. Again, one of my favorite phenomenon in the reality TV world. It's amazing for something to launch off the ground and get one season, and it says a lot that it didn't get a second season. I enjoyed it. I definitely understand where the critics came from. The pacing was weird. Some of the storylines got strange. For a show that kind of like focuses on women, again, for a lot of them, it really puts their storylines only in perspective to the men that they're related to and connected to. That just kind of feels like a bit of a downer and not the intended goal. This is 2015 as well, so it's like, come on. We were like in like pop feminism peak era at that time. Hillary Clinton was doing her 2016 presidential run. Broad City was still in the air. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the recap episode. If you enjoyed what you heard today in this episode, please consider following the podcast on your preferred podcast listening platform, rating the show, reviewing the show, and sharing it with a friend. Maybe they'll enjoy this episode, or maybe others. I mentioned a lot in this episode, another one-season Bravo show about affluent women and their misadventures in romance, Princesses Long Island. I recommend you check out that episode if you'd like to hear more about this kind of TV genre and this kind of show. Also, I'd like to plug the Instagram. You can follow me at The Recap Episode, or also subscribe on YouTube at The Recap Episode Pod. Again, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to take a page out of Liza's book and go symbolically smash a light bulb.